Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence, and had lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to distress or vex her.
Emma lived with her father at Hartfield, the principal house in the village of Highbury. He was a most affectionate, indulgent father, and in consequence of her sister's marriage, Emma had been mistress of his house from a very early period. Her mother had died too long ago for her to have more than an indistinct remembrance of her caresses, and her place had been supplied by an excellent woman as a governess.
16 years had Miss Taylor been in Mr. Woodhouse's family, less as a governess than a friend. Even before Miss Taylor had ceased to hold the nominal office of governess, the mildness of her temper had hardly allowed her to show any restraint upon Emma.
The real evils, indeed, of Emma's situation were the power of having rather too much of her own way, and a tendency to think a little too well of herself.
Then sorrow came, a gentle sorrow. Miss Taylor married.
The wedding over and the bride people gone, Emma and her father were left together, with no prospect of a third to cheer along an evening.
Mr. Woodhouse composed himself to sleep after dinner as usual, and his daughter had then only to sit and think of what she had lost. The want of Miss Taylor would be felt every hour of the day.
How was Emma to bear the change? She dearly loved her father, but he was no companion for her. He could not meet her in conversation rational or playful.
The evil of the actual disparity in their ages was much increased by his constitution and habits. For having been a valetudinarian all his life, without activity of mind or body, he was a much older man in ways than in years, and though everywhere beloved for the friendliness of his heart and his amiable temper,
his talents could not have recommended him at any time.
Poor Miss Taylor. I wish she were here again. What a pity it is that Mr. Weston ever thought of her.
I cannot agree with you, Papa. You know I cannot. Mr. Weston thoroughly deserves a good wife, and you would not have had Miss Taylor live with us forever and bear all my odd humours when she might have had a house of her own.
A house of her own? But where is the advantage of a house of her own? This is 3 times as large, and you never have any odd humours, my dear.
How often we shall be going to see them, and they coming to see us.
My dear, how am I to get so far? Randalls is such a distance. It is half a mile. I could not walk half so far.
No, Papa, we must go in the carriage, to be sure.
The carriage? But James will not like to put the horses to for such a little way. And where are the poor horses to be while we are paying our visit?
They are to be put into Mr. Weston's stable, Papa. You know we've settled that already.
Emma spared no exertions to maintain a happier flow of ideas, and hoped by the help of backgammon to get her father tolerably through the evening. But a visitor walked in and made backgammon unnecessary.
Mr. Knightley, a sensible man, about 7 or 8 and 30, was a very old and intimate friend of the family.
It is very kind of you, Mr. Knightley, to come out at this late hour to call upon us. I'm afraid you must have had a shocking walk.
Not at all, sir. It is a beautiful moonlight night, and so mild that I must draw back from your great fire.
But you must have found it very damp and dirty. I wish you may not catch cold.
Dirty, sir. Look at my boots, not a speck on them.
Well, that is quite surprising, for we have had a vast deal of rain here. It rained dreadfully hard for half an hour while we were at breakfast. I wanted them to put off the marriage ceremony.
By the by, I have not wished you the joy on Miss Taylor's wedding. How did you all behave? Who cried the most?
Ah, poor Miss Taylor. 'Tis a sad business.
Poor Mr. and Miss Woodhouse, if you please. But I cannot possibly say poor Miss Taylor. I have a great regard for you and Emma, but when it comes to the question of dependence or independence, at any rate, it must be better to have only one to please than two.
Especially when one of those is such a fanciful, troublesome creature. That is what you have in your head, I know, and what you would say if my father were not by.
Oh, I believe it is very true, my dear, indeed. I'm afraid I am sometimes very fanciful and troublesome.
Oh, my dearest papa, I did not think I could mean you. What a horrible idea. And I only meant myself. Mr. Knightley loves to find fault with me. You know, it's all a joke.
Mr. Knightley, in fact, was one of the few people who could see faults in Emma Woodhouse, and the only one who ever told her of them.
This was not particularly agreeable to Emma herself.
Well, you want to hear about the wedding, and I shall be happy to tell you, for we all behaved charmingly. Everybody was punctual, and everybody in their best looks. Not a tear, and hardly a long face to be seen.
Dear Emma bears everything so well, but Mr. Knightley, she is really very sorry to lose poor Miss Taylor, and I'm sure she will miss her more than she thinks.
It is impossible that Emma should not miss such a companion, but every friend of Miss Taylor's must be glad to have her so happily married.
And you've forgotten one matter of joy to me, that I made the match. I made the match myself.
Ah, my dear, I wish you would not make matches and foretell things, for whatever you say always comes to pass.
What are you proud of? You made a lucky guess, that is all.
My dear, pray do not make any more matches. They are silly things, and break up one's family circle grievously.
Only one more, Papa. Only for Mr. Elton. Poor Mr. Elton. You like Mr. Elton, Papa? I must look about for a wife for him. He's been here a whole year and has fitted up his vicarage so comfortably. It would be a shame to have him single any longer.
Mr. Elton is a very pretty young man, to be sure, and a very good young man, and I have a great regard for him. But if you want to show him any attention, my dear, ask him to come and dine with us.
I agree with you entirely, sir. Invite him to dinner, Emma, and help him to the best of the fish and the chicken. But leave him to choose his own wife. Depend upon it, a man of 6 or 7 and 20 can take care of himself.
Emma disregarded Mr. Knightley's advice. In addition to looking for a wife for Mr. Elton, Emma felt the need for a new companion for herself to replace Miss Taylor. On being introduced to a Miss Harriet Smith by Mrs. Goddard, the mistress of the local boarding school, Emma felt she need look no further.
Miss Smith was a girl of 17 whom Emma knew very well by sight and had long felt an interest in on account of her beauty.
Harriet Smith was the natural daughter of somebody.
Somebody had placed her several years back at Mrs. Goddard's school in Highbury.
And somebody had lately raised her from the condition of scholar to that of parlour boarder.
This was all that was generally known of her history.
Miss Smith was a very pretty girl. She was short, plump and fair, with a fine blue eyes, light hair, regular features, and a look of great sweetness.
Miss Woodhouse was so great a personage in Highbury that the humble, grateful little girl was highly gratified to find her friendship sought.
Harriet Smith's intimacy at Hartfield was soon a settled thing, and Emma was quite convinced of her being exactly the young friend she wanted.
Emma was not struck by anything remarkably clever in Miss Smith's conversation, but she found her altogether very engaging and showing so proper and becoming a deference that she must have good sense and deserve encouragement. Encouragement should be given. She would form her opinions and her manners.
Emma decided to detach Harriet Smith from her bad acquaintance and introduce her into society.
Harriet had just returned from a long visit in the country to some young ladies who had been at school with her from a family of the name of Martin, whom Emma knew well by character, as renting a large farm from Mr. Knightley, who thought highly of them.
But Emma believed they must be coarse and unpolished and very unfit to be the intimates of a girl who wanted only a little more knowledge and elegance to be quite perfect.
Do tell me about the Martins, Harriet.
Oh, yes, Miss Woodhouse. Mrs. Martin has 2 parlours, 2 very good parlours indeed, and 8 cows. One, a little Welsh cow, a very pretty little cow indeed, and Mrs. Martin said, as I was so fond of it, it should be called my cow.
Your cow?
Yes.
Oh. And her husband, Mr. Martin, what is he like?
Oh, he's dead. Well, Mr. Martin is her son.
Her son, I see. Mr. Martin is, I suppose, not a man of information. He does not read.
Oh, yes. Well, that is... No, I do not know, but I believe he has read a good deal. He reads the agricultural reports and some other books that lay on one of the window seats.
What sort of looking man is Mr. Martin?
Oh, not handsome. Not at all handsome. I thought him very plain at first, but I do not think him so plain now. One does not, you know, after a time. But, oh, did you never see him? Well, he has passed you very often.
That may be. I may have seen him 50 times, but without having any idea of his name. A young farmer is the very last sort of person to raise my curiosity.
To be sure. Oh, yes, it is not likely you should ever have observed him. But he knows you very well indeed, by sight.
I have no doubt of his being a very respectable young man.
Oh, indeed he is, Miss Woodhouse.
As such, I wish him well. What do you imagine his age to be?
He was 24, the 8th of last June, and my birthday is the 23rd. which is just a fortnight and days difference, which is very odd.
Oh, only 24. That is too young to marry. 6 years hence, if he could meet with a good sort of woman in the same rank as his own, it might be very desirable.
6 years hence? Oh dear, Miss Woodhouse, he would be 30 years old.
I wish you may not get into a scrape, Harriet, whenever he does marry.
A scrape?
I mean, as to being acquainted with his wife.
Oh.
The misfortune of your birth ought to make you particularly careful.
Oh.
Though there can be no doubt of your being a gentleman's daughter.
Do you really think so?
Indeed I do. It will be advisable to have as few odd acquaintances as may be.
To be sure.
Mr. Martin had been Harriet's first admirer, but Emma trusted that Harriet would not oppose any friendly arrangement she might make for her friend.
Mr. Martin, if I may borrow yourself and pop a jacket on you, and if you would come and walk on stage and stand and look respectfully at the ladies when they come and wait, and then when you hear Emma say, "Oh, that's the time to go."
Oh, Miss Woodhouse, it is he!
It is who?
Mr. Robert Martin.
Oh.
Only think of our happening to meet him. Oh, how very odd. Oh, well, Miss Woodhouse, is he like what you expected? What do you think of him? Do you think him so very plain?
He is very plain, undoubtedly. Remarkably plain. But that is nothing compared with his entire want of gentility. I had no idea he could be so very clownish.
Oh, to be sure. Well, he is not so genteel as a real gentleman.
I think, Harriet, since your acquaintance with us, you have been repeatedly in the company of some very good specimens of well-educated, well-bred men.
To be sure.
I should be surprised if after seeing them you could be in the company with Mr. Martin again, without perceiving him to be a very inferior creature.
Oh, certainly.
And consider, what is passable in youth is detestable in age. What would he be at 45?
There is no saying, indeed.
There may be pretty good guessing. He will be completely gross, vulgar farmer, thinking of nothing but profit and loss.
Will he? Indeed. Oh, that will be very bad.
Harriet, compare Mr. Martin with the gentleman you have been lately used to, with Mr. Weston and Mr. Elton. I think a young man might be recommended to take Mr. Elton as a model.
I'm sure you are right, Miss Woodhouse.
Mr. Elton is good-humoured, cheerful, obliging and gentle.
Oh, yes.
I do not know whether he has any design of ingratiating himself with either of us, Harriet, but it strikes me that his manners of late have been softer than they used to be.
Really, Miss Woodhouse? Well, I think you must be right, because you are so very clever and you notice everything.
It must be to please you. Did not I tell you what he said of you the other day?
Oh, pray do tell me again.
Well, Harriet, what do you think? Mr. Elton said that without doubt you were one of the prettiest young ladies in Highbury.
Really, Miss Woodhouse? I always thought Mr. Elton very agreeable.
And I think Mr. Elton finds you very agreeable, Harriet.
Oh, sorry, Miss Woodhouse, I forgot. Ladies do not giggle.
Emma believed Mr. Elton was the very person to drive the young farmer out of Harriet's head.
Mr. Elton was really a very pleasing young man. A young man whom any woman, not fastidious, might like. He was reckoned very handsome, his person much admired in general.
Though not by Emma, there being a want of elegance of feature, which she could not dispense with.
But the girl who could be gratified by a Robert Martin's riding about the country to get walnuts for her might very well be conquered by Mr. Elton's admiration.
This gentleman paid such frequent visits to Hartfield, where Harriet now spent most of her time with Emma, that the latter was quite convinced of his being in the fairest way of falling in love with her friend, if not in love already. Moreover, she was soon pretty confident of creating as much liking on Harriet's side as there could be any occasion for.
How kind of you to call. I was outside. I hope you've not been waiting long. You find me here alone as my father is taking his daily turns about the garden. But I expect Miss Smith here at any moment.
Oh, Miss Woodhouse, you must allow me to praise you for your attentions to Miss Smith.
Why, I thank you, Mr. Elton. She does well, does she not?
You have given Miss Smith all that she required.
I have?
You have made her graceful and easy.
I am much obliged to you for thinking so.
She was a beautiful creature when she came to you.
Indeed.
But in my opinion, the attractions you have added are infinitely superior to what she received from nature.
I am glad you think I've been useful to her. But Harriet only wanted drawing out and receiving very few hints.
Well, perhaps, but then...
She had all that graceful, natural sweetness of temper and artlessness in herself. I've done very little.
If it were admissible to contradict a lady...
I have perhaps given her a little more decision of character, have taught her to think on points which had not fallen in her way before.
Exactly so. That is what principally strikes me. So much superadded decision of character. Skilful has been the hand.
Great has been the pleasure, I'm sure. I never met with a disposition more truly amiable than Harriet.
I have no doubt of it.
Ah, here she is.
Miss Smith, how pleasant it is to see you again.
Well, thank you, Mr. Elton, Miss Woodhouse. I hope you have not been kept waiting.
No, indeed, Harriet. Come. Mr. Elton and I have been in conversation. Harriet, I just had a fine thought. Did you ever have your likeness taken?
Miss Woodhouse?
Did you ever sit for your picture?
Oh, dear me, no, never.
What an exquisite possession a good picture of her would be. If Harriet would sit for me, it would be such a delight to have her picture.
Oh, I never thought.
Oh, let me entreat you. It would indeed be a delight. Let me entreat you, Miss Woodhouse, to exercise so charming a talent in favour of your friend.
Thank you.
I know what your drawings are. Is not this room rich in specimens of your landscapes and flowers? And has not Mrs. Weston some of your inimitable figure pieces in her drawing room?
Yes, good man, but what has all that to do with taking likenesses? You know nothing of drawing. Don't pretend to be in raptures about mine. Keep your raptures for Harriet's face. Well, if you will give me such kind encouragement, Mr. Elton, I believe I shall try what I can do.
Oh, Miss Woodhouse.
Oh, pray do, Miss Woodhouse.
Harriet's features are very delicate, which makes a likeness difficult. And yet there is a peculiarity in the shape of the eye and the lines about the mouth which one ought to catch.
Exactly so. The shape of the eye and the lines around the mouth, which, yes, I have no doubt of your success. Pray attempt it. It will indeed, to use your own words, be an exquisite possession.
But I'm afraid, Mr. Elton, Harriet will not like to see it. She thinks so little of her own beauty.
But still, I cannot imagine she would not be persuaded. Miss Smith, Miss Woodhouse has an excellent scheme. You must be prevailed upon to sit for your picture.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Elton. I do not know. That is Miss Woodhouse. Are you certain you would like me to sit for you?
It is settled. I shall begin directly.
Oh.
Excellent!
So, I had sworn never to draw a likeness again after my sister provoked me, saying the flattering portrait I drew of her husband did not do him justice.
Oh, fine, Miss Woodhouse.
But for Harriet's sake, and as there are no husbands and wives in the case at present, I will break my resolution now.
No husbands and wives in the case at present. Exactly so.
Mr. Elton spoke with so interested a consciousness that Emma began to consider whether she had not better leave him together with Harriet at once. But as she wanted to be drawing, his declaration of love must wait a little longer. Thus the sitting began.
Now, Harriet, you must sit here with your hands like this. This. No, like this. But you must not move.
Exactly so, Miss Smith. Exactly so, Miss Woodhouse. Miss Woodhouse, I marvel at your ability to capture the contours of Miss Smith's face.
Thank you. Harriet still.
Oh, I am sorry, Miss Woodhouse.
Be patient, Miss Smith. A work of art is emerging. Such precision. The deftness of your pencil. What skill! It is a true likeness, Miss Smith. It is charming. Quite charming.
Mr. Elton, I must beg you to place yourself elsewhere as I'm easily distracted.
Oh, certainly, Miss Woodhouse, forgive me. What progress I can see.
Mr. Elton, if you'd be so good as to read to us, it would be a kindness indeed. It would amuse us and make Miss Smith's part less irksome.
I would be only too happy to oblige.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Elton. How kind.
There's a book on that table.
Pride and Prejudice. A novel by the author of Sense and Sensibility. New to me.
And to us too. Pray entertain us, Mr. Elton.
Chapter 1. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighbourhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of some one or other of their daughters.
Though Emma had occupied Mr. Elton with a book, he still jumped up frequently to see her progress and be charmed. But Emma told herself that anything less would have been too little like Harriet's lover. The sitting was altogether very satisfactory.
Harriet, I think I must let you rest now.
Oh, may I see?
Of course. I flatter myself that I have caught your likeness somewhat.
Do I really look like that?
Indeed, the likeness is unmistakable.
Harriet, you will come and sit for me again tomorrow.
Why, certainly, Miss Woodhouse.
Ladies, may I entreat you for permission to come again tomorrow? To read to you?
By all means. We shall be most happy to consider you as one of the party.
In much the same manner, the picture progressed. Everybody who saw it was pleased, but Mr. Elton was in continual raptures, and defended it through every criticism. Soon, Mr. Knightley came to admire it too.
You have made her too tall, Emma.
He is right.
Oh, no, certainly not too tall. Not in the least too tall. She's sitting down. Proportions for shortening. No, it gives one exactly the idea of such a height as Miss Smith's. Exactly so, indeed.
I cannot agree with you.
It is very pretty. So prettily done, just as your drawings always are, my dear. I do not know anybody who draws so well as you do.
Thank you, dearest Papa.
The only thing I do not thoroughly like is she seems to be sitting out of doors with only a little shawl over her shoulders, and it makes one think she might catch cold.
Oh, my dear Papa, it's supposed to be summer. A warm day in summer. Look at that tree.
But it is never safe to sit out of doors, my dear.
You, sir, may say anything, but I must confess that I regard it as a most happy thought, the placing of Miss Smith out of doors. And the tree is touched with such inimitable spirit.
The tree?
Oh, it is most admirable. I cannot keep my eyes from it. I never saw such a likeness.
With such encouragement, I think I shall get it framed.
Oh, might I be entrusted with this commission, Miss Woodhouse? It's impossible to say how much I should be gratified by being employed on such an errand.
I could not give you such a troublesome office for the world.
I insist. I shall ride with it to London, where I will choose the frame.
If you're really in earnest,
Allow me.
I'm most grateful, Mr. Elton.
What a precious deposit.
This man is almost too gallant, but he's an excellent young man and will suit Harriet exactly. It will be an exactly so, as he says himself.
Here is your gruel, sir.
Thank you, Bessie. Thank you. Gruel. A nice basin of gruel is so warming and excellent for the health. And it is so light on the stomach. I do wish I could persuade Emma as to its virtues. Bessie, will you please ask Miss Woodhouse if she will take some?
Yes, sir, certainly. Miss Woodhouse would...
I do wonder that it's not being taken every evening by everybody.
The very day of Mr. Elton's going to London produced a fresh occasion for Emma's services towards her friend.
Miss Woodhouse, who would have thought it? I am so surprised. I do not know what to do.
What is it, Harriet?
It is a proposal of marriage from Mr. Robert Martin. He has written me a very good letter. At least I think it be so. And he has written as if he loved me very much. But I do not know. So I have come as fast as I could to ask you, Miss Woodhouse, what should I do?
My word, this man is determined not to lose anything for want of asking. He will connect himself well if he can.
Will you read the letter? Oh, pray do. I would rather that you would. Well, is it a good letter, or is it too short?
Yes, indeed, a very good letter. So good a letter, Harriet, that everything considered, I think one of his sisters must have helped him. I can hardly imagine the young man I saw talking with you the other day could express himself with so much clarity if left quite to his own powers. And yet it's not the style of a woman. Better written letter, Harriet, than I'd expected.
Well, and what shall I do?
What shall you do? In what respect? You mean with regard to this letter?
Yes.
But what are you in doubt of? You must answer it, of course, and speedily.
Yes, but what shall I say? Oh, dear Miss Woodhouse, please advise me.
Oh, no. The letter had much better be all your own. You will express yourself very properly, I'm sure. Your meaning must be unequivocal, no doubts or demurs. Such expressions of gratitude and concern for the pain you're inflicting, as propriety requires, will present themselves unbidden to your mind, I am persuaded.
You think I ought to refuse him?
Ought to refuse him? My dear Harriet, what do you mean? Are you in any doubt as to that? I thought, but I beg your pardon. Perhaps I've been under a mistake. I certainly have been misunderstanding you if you feel in any doubt as to the purport of your answer. I had imagined you were consulting me only as to the wording of it. You mean to return a favourable answer, I collect?
No, I do not. That is, I do not mean. What shall I do? What would you advise me to do? Pray, dear Miss Woodhouse, tell me what I ought to do.
I shall not give you any advice, Harriet. I'll have nothing to do with it. This is a point which you must settle with your own feelings.
I had no notion that he liked me so very much.
I lay it down as a general rule, Harriet, that if a woman doubts as to whether she should accept a man or not, she certainly ought to refuse him. If she can hesitate as to yes, she ought to say no directly. It is not a state to be safely entered into with doubtful feelings, with half a heart. I thought it my duty as a friend, and older than yourself, to say thus much to you. But do not imagine I want to influence you.
Oh, no, I am sure you are a great deal too kind to. But if you would just advise me as to what I had best do. No, I do not mean that. As you say, one's mind ought to be quite made up. One should not be hesitating. It is a very serious thing. It will be safer to say no, perhaps. Do you think I had better say no?
Not for the world would I advise you either way. You must be the best judge of your own happiness. If you prefer Mr. Martin to every other person, if you think him the most agreeable man you've ever been in company with, why should you hesitate? You blush, Harriet. Does anybody else occur to you at this moment under such a definition? Harriet, do not deceive yourself. Do not be run away with by gratitude and compassion. At this moment, whom are you thinking of?
Miss Woodhouse, as you will not give me your opinion, I must do as well as I can by myself, and I have now quite determined and almost made up my mind to refuse Mr. Robert Martin. Do you think I'm right?
Perfectly right, my dearest Harriet. You're doing exactly what you ought. While you were at all in suspense, I kept my feelings to myself. But now that you're so completely decided, I have no hesitation in it. Dear Harriet, I give myself joy of this. It would have grieved me to lose your acquaintance, which must have been the consequence of your marrying Mr. Martin.
Lose my acquaintance?
Certainly. While you were in the smallest degree wavering, I said nothing about it because I would not want to influence you. But it would have been the loss of a friend to me. I could not have visited Mrs. Robert Martin, a Abbey Mill Farm? Now I'm secure of you forever.
You could not have visited me. Oh no, to be sure you could not. But I never thought of that before. Oh, that would have been too dreadful. What an escape. Oh dear Miss Woodhouse, I would not have given up the pleasure and honour of being intimate with you for anything in the world.
Indeed, Harriet, it would have been a severe pang to lose you, but it must have been. You would have thrown yourself out of all good society. I must have given you up.
Oh dear me, how should I ever have borne it? Oh, it would have killed me never to come to visit you at Hartfield any more.
Dear affectionate creature, you banished to Abbey Mill Farm. You, confined to the society of the vulgar and the illiterate all your life. I wonder how the young man could have the assurance to ask it. He must have a pretty good opinion of himself.
I do not think he is conceited in general. At least, he is very good-natured, and I shall always feel very much obliged to him, and have a great regard for, but... Well, that is quite a different thing from... And you know, though he may like me, it does not follow that I should. And certainly I must confess that since my visiting here, I have seen people. And if one comes to compare them, person and manners, there is no comparison at all. One is so very handsome and agreeable. However, I do really think Mr. Martin a very amiable young man, and have a great opinion of him. And his being so much attached to me, and writing such a letter, but as to leaving you, that I would not do upon any consideration.
Thank you, my own sweet little friend. We will not be parted. A woman is not to marry a man merely because she's asked, or because he's attached to her, and can write a tolerable letter.
Oh no, and it is such a short letter too.
Very true. And his being able to write a good letter would be a small consolation to you for the clownish manner which might be offending you every hour of the day.
Oh, yes, very. Well, nobody cares for a letter. The thing is to be always happy, with pleasant companions. I am quite determined to refuse him. But how shall I do? What shall I say?
As to that, there will be no difficulty answering this, Harriet, but you must write directly.
Oh, you will help me, Miss Woodhouse.
Harriet, you require no assistance from me. It must be your own letter.
What shall I say?
It must be all your own words, Harriet. Though I shall help you if you insist. Come, let us get some paper.
Though Emma continued to protest against any assistance being wanted, it was in fact given in the formation of every sentence.
Finally, this letter was written and sealed and sent. The business was finished and Harriet was safe. She was rather low all evening, but Emma could allow for her amiable regrets and sometimes relieved them by speaking of her own affection, sometimes by bringing forward the idea of Mr. Elton.
Mr. Martin's mother and sisters will be unhappy, and I shall never be invited to stay at Abbey Mill Farm again.
Nor if you were could I ever bear to part with you.
I think my school teacher, Miss Nash, would be very much surprised if she knew what had happened, for she thinks her own sister very well married, and it is only to a linen draper. Mr. Martin is a gentle farmer.
One should be sorry to see greater pride or refinement in the teacher of a school. Harriet, I'm sure Miss Nash would envy you. As to anything superior for you, I suppose she is quite in the dark. The attentions of a certain Mr. Elton towards you can hardly be among the village tittle-tattle yet. Hitherto, I fancy you and I are the only people to whom his looks and manners have explained themselves.
I wonder that people should like me so much. And Mr. Elton. Now Mr. Martin has got my letter. I wonder what they are all doing. whether his sisters know. If he is unhappy, they will be unhappy too.
Let us think instead of those who are more cheerfully employed. At this moment, perhaps, Mr. Elton is showing your picture to his mother and sisters, telling them your own dear name and how much more beautiful you are in real life. How cheerful, how animated, how suspicious, how busy their imaginations all are.
My picture, but he has left my picture with the framer in Bond Street.
Has he so? Then I know nothing of Mr. Elton. No, my dear little modest Harriet, depend upon it, the picture will not be in Bond Street till just before he mounts his horse to ride back here tomorrow.
Oh, how so, Miss Woodhouse?
Your picture is his companion all this evening, his solace, his delight.
Oh, Miss Woodhouse, you really think so?
I do.
Oh.
The very next morning, Mr. Knightley walked over from Donwell Abbey to call at Hartfield.
Mr. Woodhouse, Emma, I hope I find you in good health and spirits.
How do you do, Mr. Knightley? If you'll excuse me, if you will not consider me as doing a very rude thing, I shall take Emma's advice and go out for a quarter of an hour.
Yes, dear Papa, of course Mr. Knightley will excuse you.
As the sun is out, I believe I'd better take my 3 turns. While I can, I treat you without ceremony, Mr. Knightley. We invalids think we are privileged people.
My dear sir, you cannot do better than taking a walk.
I will beg your excuse then, and take my 3 turns, my winter walk.
I cannot rate Miss Smith's beauty as you do, but she is a pretty little creature, and I am inclined to think very well of her disposition. Her character depends upon those she is with, but in good hands she will turn out a valuable woman.
I am glad you think so, and the good hands, I hope, may not be wanting.
Ah, come, you are anxious for a compliment, so I will tell you that you have improved her. You have cured her of her schoolgirl's giggle. She really does you credit.
Thank you. I should be mortified indeed if I did not believe I'd been of some use. But it is not everybody who bestow praise where they may, and you do not often overpower me with it.
Well, you are expecting her again, you say, this morning?
Almost every moment. She's been gone longer already than she intended.
Something has happened already to delay her. Some visitors, perhaps.
Highbury gossips, tiresome wretches.
Harriet may not consider everybody tiresome that you would. I must tell you that I have good reason to believe your little friend will soon hear of something to her advantage.
Indeed? How so? What sort?
A very serious sort, I assure you.
Very serious. I can only think of one thing. Who's in love with her? Who makes you their confidant? Has Mr. Elton dropped a hint to Mr. Knightley?
I have reason to think that Harriet Smith will soon have an offer of marriage.
Oh.
And from a most unexceptionable quarter.
Oh.
My tenant farmer, Robert Martin, is the man.
Oh.
It was her visit to Abbey Mill Farm this summer. He is desperately in love with her and means to marry her.
He is very obliging, but is he sure that Harriet means to marry him?
Well, means to make her an offer, then. Will that do?
Oh.
He came to Donwell Abbey 2 evenings ago on purpose to consult me about it. He knows I have a thorough regard for him and all his family. He came to ask me whether I approved his decision.
Did he now?
He is an excellent young man. I had no hesitation in advising him to marry. I praised the fair lady, too, and altogether sent him away very happy. I dare say he left the house thinking me the best friend and counselor man ever had. It is not unlikely that she may even now be detained by Mr. Martin, without thinking him at all a tiresome wretch.
Pray, Mr. Knightley, how do you know that Mr. Martin did not speak yesterday?
Well, certainly I do not absolutely know, but it may be inferred. Was not she with you the whole day?
Come, I will tell you something in return for what you have told me. He did speak yesterday. That is, he wrote and was refused. Mr. Martin wrote to Harriet and was refused.
Then she is a greater simpleton than I ever believed. What is the foolish girl about?
Oh, to be sure, it's always incomprehensible to a man that a woman should ever refuse an offer of marriage. A man always imagines a woman to be ready for anybody who asks her.
Nonsense. A man does not imagine any such thing. But what is the meaning of this? Harriet Smith refuse Robert Martin? Madness, if it is so. But I hope you are mistaken.
I saw her answer. Nothing could be clearer.
You saw her answer? You wrote her answer too, Emma. This is your doing. You persuaded her to refuse him.
And if I did, which however I'm far from allowing, I should not feel that I had done wrong. Mr. Martin is a very respectable young man, but I cannot admit him to be Harriet's equal. And I'm rather surprised indeed that he should have ventured to address her.
Not Harriet's equal. No, he is not her equal. Indeed, he is very much her superior in sense as in situation. Emma, your infatuation about that girl blinds you. Harriet Smith is the natural daughter of nobody knows whom. She is known only as a parlor boarder in a common school. She is not a sensible girl, nor a girl of any information. She has been taught nothing useful and is too young and too simple to have acquired anything herself. She is pretty and she is good-tempered, and that is all.
How can you say so?
My only scruple in advising the match was on his account, as being beneath his deserts, and a bad connection for him. But I could not reason so to a man in love.
A bad connection?
The advantage of the match I felt to be all on her side, and had not the smallest doubt, nor have I now, that there would be a general cry-out upon her extreme good luck.
No, indeed.
Even your satisfaction I made sure of. I remember saying to myself, even Emma, with all her partiality for Harriet, will think this a good match.
What? Think a farmer? With all his sense and all his merit, Mr. Martin is nothing more. A good match for my intimate friend. Mr. Martin may be the richer of the two, but he is undoubtedly her inferior as to rank and society. The sphere in which she moves is much above his. It would be a degradation.
A degradation? To illegitimacy and ignorance? To be married to a respectable, intelligent gentleman farmer?
As to the circumstances of her birth, she is not to pay for the offences of others. That she is a gentleman's daughter is indubitable to me. That she associates with gentlemen's daughters, no one, I apprehend, will deny. She is superior to Mr. Robert Martin.
Whoever might be her parents, she was as happy as possible with the Martins this summer. She had no sense of superiority then. If she has it now, you have given it. You have been no friend to Harriet Smith, Emma. Miss Robert Martin would never have proceeded so far if he had not felt persuaded of her not being disinclined to him. Depend upon it, he had encouragement.
You are a very warm friend to Mr. Martin, but are unjust to Harriet. Harriet's claims to marry well are not so contemptible as you represent them. She is not a clever girl, but she has better sense than you are aware of. And she is in fact a beautiful girl, and must be thought so by 99 people out of 100. And still it appears that men are much more philosophic on the subject of beauty than they are generally supposed, till they do fall in love with well-informed minds instead of handsome faces. A girl with such loveliness as Harriet has a certainty of being admired and sought after, of having the power of choosing from among many. I am very much mistaken if your sex in general would not think such beauty, such temper, the highest claims a woman could possess.
Upon my word, Emma, to hear you abusing the reason you have is almost enough to make me think so too. Better be without sense than misapply it, as you do.
To be sure, that is the feeling of you all. Oh, Harriet may pick and choose. Were you yourself ever to marry, she is the very woman for you. And is she, at 17, just entering into life, just beginning to be known, to be wondered because she does not accept the first offer she receives? No! Pray, let her have some time to look about her.
I have always thought it a very foolish intimacy, but I now perceive that it will be a very unfortunate one for Harriet. You will puff her up with such ideas of her own beauty and of what she has a claim to, that in a little while nobody within reach of her will be good enough for her. Vanity, working on a weak head, produces every sort of mischief. Men of sense, whatever you may choose to say, do not want silly wives. Let her marry Robert Martin, and she is safe, respectable, and happy forever.
We think so very differently on this point, Mr. Knightley. But as to my letting her marry Robert Martin, it is impossible. She has refused him, and so decidedly. I will not pretend that I might not influence her a little, but I assure you there was very little for me to do.
Emma,
He took pains to please her, and altogether, having seen nobody better, she might not find him disagreeable. But the case is altered now. She knows now what gentlemen are, and nothing but a gentleman has any chance with Harriet.
Nonsense, errant nonsense, as ever was taught.
I wonder if it will rain this afternoon.
Robert Martin has no great loss, if he can but think so. Your views of Harriet are best known to yourself, but as you make no secret of your love of matchmaking, it is fair to suppose that views and plans and projects you have. And as a friend, I shall just hint to you that if Elton is the man, I think it will be labor in vain.
No, indeed.
Depend upon it, Elton will not do. Elton is a very good sort of man and a very respectable vicar of Highbury, but not at all likely to make an imprudent match. He knows the value of a good income as well as anybody. Elton may talk sentimentality, but he will act rationally. He is as well acquainted with his own claims as you can be with Harriet's. He knows that he is a very handsome young man and a great favorite wherever he goes. I am convinced he does not mean to throw himself away.
I'm very much obliged to you. If I had set my heart on Mr. Elton's marrying Harriet, it would have been very kind to open my eyes. But at present, I only want to keep Harriet to myself. I have done with matchmaking, indeed.
Good morning to you.
Emma remained in a state of vexation too. Mr. Knightley had frightened her a little about Mr. Elton. However, he did not make due allowance for the influence of a strong, passionate war with all interested motives.
Mr. Knightley saw no such passion, and of course thought nothing of its effects. But she saw too much of it to feel a doubt of its overcoming any hesitation in Mr. Elton. Emma was not so materially cast down, however, but that a little time and the return of Harriet were very adequate restoratives.
Harriet's cheerful look and manner established hers. She came back not to think of Mr. Martin, but to talk of Mr. Elton.
Oh, Miss Woodhouse, you will never guess who is the subject of village tittle-tattle.
Tell me.
Mr. Elton. He was seen yesterday on his way to London, in spite of the fact that he was going to miss whist club night, something he has never missed before. He declared to Mr. Perry the doctor that he was going to London on business which he would not put off for any inducement in the world, as he was the bearer of something exceedingly precious.
Your picture!
And when asked if there was a lady in the case, Mr. Elton only looked very conscious and smiling and rode off in great spirits.
Harriet, you made a conquest!
Oh, I cannot believe it! I do so wonder, Miss Woodhouse, that you should not be married, or going to be married, so charming as you are.
My being charming, Harriet, is not quite enough to induce me to marry. I must find other people charming, one other person at least. I have very little intention of ever marrying at all.
Oh, so you say, but I cannot believe it.
I have never been in love, and I do not think I ever shall. And without love, I am sure I should be a fool to change such a situation as mine. I am mistress of Hartfield, and never could I expect to be so truly beloved and important, so always first and always right in any man's eyes, as I am in my father's.
Oh, but then, to be an old maid, like Miss Bates.
I thought I should be like Miss Bates, I'd marry tomorrow.
Mr. Elton duly returned from London, and the painting of Harriet, elegantly framed, was hung over the mantelpiece in the common sitting room at Hartfield. Mr. Elton would look at it and sigh and speak his admiration.
As for Harriet, her feelings for him really had formed themselves into a strong and steady attachment. Emma was perfectly satisfied that Robert Martin, the farmer, had been forgotten.
Autumn turned to winter, and still Mr. Elton's attentions continued, as did his frequent visits to Hartfield.
He was delighted to have been included in an invitation to Christmas dinner at the home of the newly-wed Mr. and Mrs. Weston.
Mr. Elton declared Harriet's absence on account of a sore throat to be a dreadful loss to the party. This was very proper. The sigh which accompanied it was truly estimable.
But it should have lasted longer. Emma was rather in dismay when only half a minute afterwards he remarked on the excellent use of sheepskin for carriages and how very comfortable it was.
He was in high spirits when they arrived at the Westons, and caused Emma some discomfiture by being markedly attentive towards her the whole time they were there. He not only sat at her elbow, but was continually obtruding his happy countenance on her notice and addressing her upon every occasion.
The evening's enjoyment was cut short as falling snow necessitated the carriages being called early. A sequence of unexpected events then found Emma travelling back alone in a carriage with Mr. Elton.
I believe Mr. Elton has been drinking too much of Mr. Weston's good wine. I feel sure he will want to be talking nonsense. If only the snow had waited till tomorrow, poor Mr. and Mrs. Weston must be...
Oh, my dear Miss Woodhouse, what a precious opportunity this is. My sentiments are already well known to your dearest Miss Woodhouse. I'm in hope, in fear, yours in adoration, ready to die if you refuse me.
Pray, Mr. Elton, stop.
I flatter myself that my ardent attachment and unequalled love, unexampled passion could not fail of having some effect, Miss Woodhouse. I am very much resolved on being accepted. Speak those words I long to hear. Say, you will be my wife?
I'm very much astonished, Mr. Elton. This to me? You forget yourself and take me for my friend, Miss Smith.
Miss Smith? Miss Smith? What can you possibly mean? Oh, do not speak of Miss Smith. Oh, Miss Woodhouse, my passion is for you and only you. I urge you to give me a favourable answer.
Mr. Elton, my astonishment is much beyond anything I can express. After such behaviour as I have witnessed during the last month to Miss Smith, such attentions as I've been daily in the habit of observing, be addressing me in this manner, this is an unsteadiness of character which I had not supposed possible. Believe me, sir, I'm very far from gratified in being the object of such professions.
Good heaven, Miss Smith? I never thought of Miss Smith in the whole course of my existence. Never paid her any attentions, but as your friend. Never cared whether she were dead or alive, but as your friend. Miss Smith, indeed. Oh, Miss Woodhouse. Who can think of Miss Smith when Miss Woodhouse is near? Everything that I have said or done, this past many weeks, has been with the sole view of making my adoration of yourself. You cannot seriously doubt it. No, I'm sure you have seen and understood me.
No, sir, it confesses no such thing. So far from having long understood you, I have been in a most complete error with respect to your views till this moment. As to myself, I am very sorry that you should have been giving any way to your feelings.
Oh, Miss Woodhouse.
Nothing could be further from my wishes. Had I supposed that my friend Harriet was not your attraction to Hartfield, I should certainly have thought you ill-judged in making your visits so frequent. Am I to believe that you never thought seriously of Miss Smith?
Oh, never, madam. I think seriously of Miss Smith. Miss Smith is a very good sort of girl, and no doubt there are men who might not object to... Well, everybody has their level. But as for myself, I am not, I think, quite so much at a loss as to addressing myself to Miss Smith. No, madam, my visits to Hartfield have been for yourself only, and the encouragement I received.
Encouragement? I give you encouragement. Sir, you have been entirely mistaken in supposing it. I've seen you only as the admirer of my friend. In no other light could you have been more to me than a common acquaintance. I'm exceedingly sorry, but it is well the mistake ends where it does. I have no thoughts of matrimony at present. Good night, Mr. Elton.
Good night.
Under indescribable irritation of spirits, Emma was then conveyed home to Hartfield.
Her hair was curled and the maid sent away, and Emma sat down to think and be miserable.
How could I have been so deceived? If I had not persuaded Harriet into liking the man, I could have borne anything. But poor Harriet! Oh!
Mortified and deeply offended after his unsuccessful proposal, Mr. Elton left almost immediately to spend a few weeks in Bath. With delightful rapidity he met and was very soon engaged to a Miss Augusta Hawkins of Bristol. She was said to be very charming and had an independent fortune of £10,000 or thereabouts.
Before long, Mr. Elton had married her, and she took up residence in the vicarage. From the start, Mrs. Elton resented Emma and Harriet Smith quite as much as Mr. Elton did.
Mr. Elton had been married for some time before Harriet completely recovered from the disappointment of unrequited love.
Miss Woodhouse, if you are at leisure, I have something that I should like to tell you. A sort of confession to make, and then you know it will be over.
Oh, Harriet, what is it? I beg you to tell me.
It is my duty, as I'm sure it is my wish, to have no reserves with you on this subject. As I am, happily, quite an altered creature in one respect, it is very fit that you should have the satisfaction of knowing it. I do not want to say more than is necessary. I am too much ashamed of having given way as I have done, and I dare say you understand me.
Yes, but I hope I do.
How could I so long a time be fancying myself? It seems like madness. I can see nothing extraordinary in him now. I do not care whether I meet him or not, except that of the two I would rather I did not see him. And indeed, I would go any distance around to not see him. But I do not envy his wife in the least. I neither admire her nor envy her, as I have done. Well, she is very charming, I dare say, and all that. But I think her very disagreeable. I shall never forget her look the other night. However, I assure you, Miss Woodhouse, I wish her no evil.
I commend your forbearance, Harriet. It is of Mr. and Mrs. Elton that you speak.
It is. No, let them be ever so happy together. It will not give me another moment's pang. And to convince you that I have been speaking the truth, I am now going to destroy what I ought to have destroyed long ago, but I ought never to have kept. I know that very well. However, now I will destroy it all, and it is my particular wish to do so in your presence, that you may see how rational I am grown. Can you not guess what this parcel holds?
Not in the least. Did he ever give you anything?
No, I cannot call them gifts, but they are things I have valued very much.
Most precious treasures?
Now, you must recollect.
No, indeed I do not.
Dear me, I should not have thought it possible you could forget what passed in this very room about court plaster. One of the very last times we met in it. But do you not remember him cutting his finger with your new penknife, and you recommending court plaster? But as you had none about you, and you knew I had, you desired me to supply him. So I took mine out and cut him a piece. But it was a great deal too large, and he cut it smaller, and kept playing some time with what was left, before he gave it back to me.
Oh!
And then, in my nonsense, I could not help making a treasure of it, so I put it by, never to be used, and looked at it now and then as a great treat.
My dearest Harriet, you make me more ashamed of myself than I can bear. Remember it. I remember it all now. Except your saving this relic. I knew nothing of that till this moment. But the cutting of the finger, and my recommending court plaster and saying I had none about me. Oh, my sins, my sins. I had plenty all the while in my pocket. One of my senseless tricks. I deserve to be under continual blush all the rest of my life. Well, go on.
What else? You really had some at hand yourself. I'm sure I never suspected it. You did it so naturally.
So, you actually put this piece of court plaster by for his sake? Lord bless me. When should I ever have thought of treasuring a piece of court plaster? I was never equal to this.
Here is something more valuable. I mean something that has been more valuable, because this is what once really did belong to him, which the court plaster never did.
Oh, Harriet, what is this superior treasure? The end of a pencil without any lead.
This was really his. Do you not remember one morning he wanted to make a memorandum in his pocketbook? It was about spruce beer. Mr. Knightley had been telling him something about brewing spruce beer, and he wanted to put it down. But when he took out his pencil, there was so little lead that he soon cut it all away, and it would not do, so you lent him another. And this was left upon the table as good for nothing. But I kept my eye on it, and as soon as I dared, caught it up, and never parted with it again from that moment.
I do remember it. I remember it perfectly. Talking about spruce beer. Oh yes, Mr. Knightley and I both saying we liked it, and Mr. Elton's seeming resolve to learn to like it too. I perfectly remember it. Stop. Mr. Knightley was standing here, just here, was he not? I have an idea he was standing here.
I do not know. I cannot recollect. It's very odd, but I cannot recollect. Mr. Elton was sitting here, I remember. Much about where I am now.
Go on.
Oh, that's all. I've nothing more to show you, or to say, except that I am now going to throw them both into the fire, and I wish you to see me do it.
My poor dear Harriet. And have you actually found happiness in treasuring up these things?
Yes, simpleton as I was. But I am quite ashamed of it now, and wish I can forget as easily as I can burn them. It was very wrong of me, you know, to keep any remembrances after he was married. I knew it was, but I had not enough resolution to part with them.
But Harriet, is it necessary to burn the court plaster? I have not a word to say for the bit of old pencil, but the court plaster might be useful.
I shall be happy to burn it, but it has a disagreeable look to me. I must get rid of anything. Well, there it goes, and there is an end. Thank heaven. Mr. Elton.
An end to Mr. Elton, so it was. But it was not the end of Emma's aspirations for her friend. Still she encouraged Harriet to set her sights on high, and still Harriet listened obediently to her dear Miss Woodhouse.
That is, until Harriet confessed that Mr. Knightley was the new object of her affections. Only then did Emma see the light. This would not do at all, for who should marry Mr. Knightley but herself? Happily for Emma, Mr. Knightley had come to the same realization and finally declared himself.
But Harriet, what of poor Harriet? Consolation was at hand in the form of Mr. Robert Martin, who tried a second time for Miss Smith's hand, and this time was accepted.
Emma, far from opposing the match, was pleased to forget her objections to farmers.